Hi, today I'd like to invite you to watch a short recap of the movie The Pursuit of Happiness. Enjoy! Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more movie recaps. In 1981 San Francisco, Chris Gardner struggles to sell expensive bone density scanners. Doctors consider them unnecessary luxuries, leaving his family dependent on every difficult sale. Most remain unsold. At home, Linda carries the household through exhausting shifts while overdue taxes, rent, and parking tickets keep growing. Chris still believes one more sale can stabilize them. Their savings are trapped in unsold scanners, and even small expenses become arguments. Linda has heard his promises before, while Christopher watches the tension quietly. Christopher hears everything. A Rubik's Cube becomes a symbol of Chris's quick mind, but intelligence alone cannot solve the recession, mounting debt, or the practical needs of his family. Bills keep arriving. Outside a brokerage, Chris notices a smiling man with a red sports car. Learning that stockbrokers need skill with numbers, and people gives him a new ambition. Chris tells Linda he may pursue brokerage work because mathematics has always come naturally to him. She answers with bitter disbelief, comparing the dream to becoming an astronaut. Linda reminds him they are already months behind on rent and surviving on her double shifts. Chris insists every sales call is still for their family. Rent looms. A notice announces applications for Dean Witter's broker training program. Chris leaves his scanner with a stranger and enters, hoping to learn how candidates are chosen. Jay waits. He collects an application, but the woman guarding his scanner suddenly runs away with it. Chris abandons the office and races after the device containing his savings. The program accepts 20 unpaid trainees and hires only one. With little formal education, Chris must prove that his ability matters more than an impressive resume. Christopher's cheap daycare fills the children's time with television and even misspells happiness on its wall. Chris demands better despite having no affordable alternative. The error bothers him. Walking home, Chris tries to keep life playful for his son. Their easy conversation briefly hides the financial pressure waiting inside the apartment. Christopher's trust keeps him moving. Chris confronts the daycare owner about violent language and constant television. She dismisses his complaints because his payments are late and better childcare costs more. Determined to be remembered, Chris repeatedly approaches recruiter Jay Twistle and places his application directly in Jay's hands instead of waiting anonymously in a stack. Jay barely pauses. Chris spots the stolen scanner on the street and gives chase. Recovering it matters because losing even one machine means losing an entire month of possible income. The pursuit ends without a clean solution, and Chris returns home carrying more frustration than money. His investment now feels less like opportunity and more like a trap. For Christopher's birthday, Chris protects a small celebration and lets his son enjoy basketball. These modest moments are becoming the family's only relief. The small gift matters. Linda finally says she no longer believes they will recover. Chris refuses to surrender, but his optimism now sounds painfully familiar to the person financing it. Chris catches Jay beside a taxi and uses the ride to explain his Navy medical experience. He needs more than a resume to stand out. When Jay mentions the supposedly impossible Rubik's Cube, Chris asks for a chance. He studies its fixed centers, works quickly, and begins solving it during the ride. Chris completes the cube before Jay reaches his destination. The simple demonstration finally turns Jay's polite attention into genuine interest in the persistent applicant. Jay is visibly impressed. The taxi continues in the wrong direction, and Chris cannot afford the fare. When the driver demands payment, Chris bolts, gambling that escape is his only option. He sprints through a park with the furious driver behind him. The chase becomes another humiliating consequence of trying to reach a better life without money. He escapes. Chris dives onto a departing train and escapes, but another scanner is left behind in the chaos. The opportunity with Jay has cost him yet another asset. As he travels home, Chris reflects on the Declaration of Independence. The promise is only a pursuit of happiness, suggesting happiness itself may never be guaranteed. It lingers. Jay finally calls and offers Chris a formal interview. Chris writes down every detail, knowing this appointment could redirect both his career and Christopher's future. Hope returns instantly. Before he can celebrate, Chris discovers Linda and Christopher are gone. Panic replaces hope as he searches the neighborhood and tries to hold the interview information in memory. Linda admits she wants to leave. Chris accepts that their relationship is ending, but he fiercely insists Christopher must remain with the parent who will not abandon him. Chris collects his son and reassures him that they will stay together. He hides the uncertainty behind simple questions about whether Christopher still feels safe and happy. Their landlord demands the apartment immediately. Chris negotiates one final week by promising to paint the rooms himself, buying only a little time before eviction. The deadline tightens. While Chris works on the apartment, officials arrive over unpaid parking tickets. The landlord grants a week, but the city takes away the night before his crucial interview. Chris is jailed until the fines clear, unable to collect Christopher or prepare. He begs Linda to take their son for one night and return him afterward. From the detention phone, Chris makes Linda promise that Christopher will come back. Custody now depends on trust between two people whose relationship has collapsed. Linda reluctantly agrees. Released minutes before the appointment, Chris runs across San Francisco in paint-covered clothes. Missing the interview would end his brokerage dream before it begins. He cannot change clothes. He reaches Dean Witter breathless and waits among polished candidates. Every person around him looks prepared, while Chris appears to have wandered in from a construction site. Instead of inventing an excuse, Chris tells the partners he was arrested for parking tickets while painting his apartment. His honesty makes the bizarre appearance credible. Chris explains that he may not know every answer, but he always knows how to find one. His confidence and resourcefulness begin changing the room's judgment. They listen. When asked how someone without a shirt could still be hired, Chris jokes that the man must have worn excellent pants. The tense interview finally breaks into laughter. Dean Witter offers him the internship, but it pays nothing and guarantees nothing. Only one trainee out of 20 will receive a permanent broker position. No safer option exists. Back in the apartment, Chris calculates the risk while finishing the landlord's painting. 6 unpaid months may create a future, but they can also destroy the present. Linda announces that she is moving to New York for work. Their partnership is over, and the only remaining question is where Christopher will live. Linda argues that a child belongs with his mother and doubts Chris can provide food. Chris counters that the internship is a real path, not another fantasy. After a painful confrontation, Linda accepts that Christopher should stay with Chris. She leaves alone, trusting the father she can no longer continue living beside. Christopher remains behind. Chris calls Dean Witter and accepts the unpaid internship. The decision gives him a chance at a career while removing the last dependable source of household income. On Saturday, Chris takes Christopher to the basketball court before visiting more doctors. Their time together must now fit around every remaining scanner sale. Christopher happily agrees. Chris thoughtlessly warns his son that professional basketball is unlikely. Watching Christopher lose confidence, he recognizes that hardship is teaching him to limit dreams. The warning crushes Christopher. He immediately corrects himself and tells Christopher to protect any goal worth pursuing. Other people's failures, even his father's, should never define the boy's possibilities. He means it. Chris sells another scanner and carefully counts the cash. He lets Christopher choose a tiny treat, showing how even a successful sale provides only temporary breathing room. After a tiny treat for Christopher, Chris enters the internship where 20 trainees must cold call wealthy prospects, pass a demanding exam, and compete for one job. Managers teach that more calls create more meetings, clients, and commissions. Chris understands the arithmetic, but he must produce results while raising Christopher alone. Failure means nothing changes. During a break, Chris encounters senior partner Martin Fromm and presents himself as confident and committed. Building relationships inside the firm may matter as much as test scores. While chasing the recovered scanner again, Chris is struck by a car and loses a shoe. He refuses treatment because being late could cost the internship. Chris arrives at daycare wearing one shoe and calmly tells Christopher what happened. His son worries about the injury, while Chris focuses on reaching the next obligation. At Dean Witter, Chris receives menial errands alongside sales work. He fetches coffee and donuts while trying to sound credible to executives who reject his calls. Because he must leave by 5 for daycare, Chris compresses 9 hours of calls into 6. He never lowers the receiver and avoids even bathroom breaks. His discipline finally reaches pension manager Walter Ribbon, who offers a meeting in 20 minutes. It is Chris's first real chance at a major client. A supervisor orders Chris to move his car just as the appointment begins. A stubborn door lock wastes precious minutes and turns a promising opening into another race. Chris runs across the city, but Walter has already left. Missing the meeting hurts because the opportunity came from efficiency he worked hard to create. Another parking problem adds costs he cannot absorb. Chris spends the weekend taking Christopher to sales appointments, promising only that a football game might happen. Christopher keeps asking what possibly means, and Chris admits it does not promise anything. Their conversation exposes how carefully the boy measures every uncertain plan. Chris visits Walter's home with Christopher and apologizes for missing the meeting. His directness impresses Walter, who listens instead of dismissing the struggling trainee. Walter appreciates the effort. Walter invites father and son to the football game. The unexpected kindness gives Christopher an adventure and places Chris beside the wealthy network he needs. Inside a private stadium box, Chris sees access that cold calls could never provide. He begins introducing himself to executives while Christopher enjoys the game. Walter declines to move his pension fund, but the outing still produces valuable contacts. Chris leaves with business cards and a larger circle of potential clients. Over the next months, Chris sells every remaining scanner and believes they can survive the internship. For a moment, his plan finally appears financially possible. Relief finally arrives. The illusion ends when the government seizes his savings for unpaid taxes. Chris discovers only $21 remains in the account that supports him and Christopher. Desperate for cash, Chris confronts an acquaintance who has owed him $14 for months. The small debt suddenly means food, transportation, and another night indoors. Chris spots the stolen scanner again and runs after it with Christopher following. He recovers the damaged machine because repairing it may be their last income. Father and son carry the broken scanner through medical appointments. Chris keeps pitching doctors while searching for a way to repair the unit and sell it again. At one office, Chris opens the scanner and tries to fix it immediately. The doctor postpones the purchase, leaving Chris with no money and little time. Returning to the motel, Chris finds their belongings outside and the room locked. He and Christopher have been evicted with nowhere prepared for the night. Chris gathers their luggage and refuses to explain the full danger to his son. The two leave the motel carrying everything they still own. Exhausted, Christopher follows his father through the station and asks where they are going. Chris has no honest answer that will not frighten him. To protect Christopher, Chris pretends the scanner is a time machine. The game transforms the station bench into a portal and gives the boy something safer to believe. Christopher closes his eyes and imagines dinosaurs surrounding them. Chris encourages the fantasy, using play to guide his son away from the reality of homelessness. They run from imaginary creatures and claim a restroom as their cave. Behind the locked door, Chris creates a bed from paper while protecting their luggage. After spending the night in the station restroom, Chris cleans up and hides the truth from coworkers, claiming he is traveling for clients to protect his dignity. Chris leaves work still pretending everything is normal, then asks a shelter for help. The women-only facility can take Christopher, but not him. They must stay together. They race to Glide Memorial before the limited beds are assigned. Every evening now depends on reaching the line before work and childcare make them late. When another man tries to take their position, Chris fights to protect it. He secures one of the last beds, though the confrontation terrifies Christopher. Inside the crowded shelter, Chris settles his son into a bunk. He stays close until Christopher relaxes, then carries the broken scanner toward the stairwell. Christopher fears his father will disappear too. Chris promises he will remain nearby and leaves the door open while working only a few steps away. Through the night, Chris repairs the scanner piece by piece. Sleep becomes another sacrifice because selling the machine may determine whether they can afford a room. At work, Chris sharpens his pitch and closes conversations quickly. He must attract clients, study for the exam, and still leave early enough for the shelter line. After another shelter line, the church service gives father and son warmth, music, and temporary community. Chris allows himself a brief emotional release before returning to the struggle. After the church service and shelter meal, the final exam becomes decisive. Chris enters knowing strong sales alone may not overcome a weak score. He has studied relentlessly. He completes the test quickly and confidently, surprising another trainee who struggled with the last page. Preparation gives Chris one result he can control. A business contact finally exchanges numbers with Chris, but Martin Fromm then borrows his last $5 for a cab. Chris agrees because refusing could damage his future. With no money and no shelter bed, Chris and Christopher spend another night in transit. The boy sleeps against him while Chris silently calculates the next day. Chris sells blood for cash and buys the replacement part the scanner needs. Even his own body becomes a resource for keeping the plan alive. That night, Christopher worries Linda left because of him. Chris firmly rejects the idea and reminds his son that adult decisions are never the child's fault. The repaired scanner finally powers on. Chris's exhausted relief comes from knowing the machine can now be sold and converted into one more chance to survive. A doctor buys the working scanner for $250. Chris uses the payment to secure a hotel room, giving Christopher one peaceful night. Away from the shelter, father and son rest together and later visit the waterfront. The quiet reminds Chris what he is fighting to preserve beyond employment. On the internship's final day, Chris learns his client work has been noticed. He has brought substantial, new business while never revealing how unstable his life became. Chris thanks the clients who supported him and finishes every remaining call. Then the partners summon him, leaving no more work to hide behind. The partners tell Chris he will start as a broker the next morning. He accepts quietly, struggling to remain composed after 6 months of fear and exhaustion. They praise his work and ask whether he still wants it. Outside, Chris disappears into the crowd and finally lets himself cry before collecting Christopher. He later founds Gardner Rich and builds the successful future he pursued. Happiness finally arrives.